To give you some just numbers for the camera nerds out there, a typical night shot, just basic stuff to account for orbital speed and how dark it is typically about a quarter second of an exposure, 6400 ISO,
and maybe an f 1.2 or 1.4 if we had the lens. So we have a super fast lens, right, to just be a giant light bucket. But then during the day, right, we go from night to day really fast because we're going so fast around the Earth. At daytime, like Don was talking about, we might be in that f5 to f8, f11 he talked about, ISO 500 for the camera, and then shutter speeds in the 1 over a couple thousand, so 1 over 2,000, 1 over 3,000 to account for that. So that's a huge, like if you roll through the clicks on your camera and go count the number of stops between day and night, it's significant.
So I want to talk for a second about where we see Don in the International Space Station right now. He's in the cupola, which is essentially our big bay window looking down at Earth, and it's where you shoot most of your photos.
Yeah.
And we have another question for you, Don, which is from Rudrick Ice asks, have you guys seen a comet pass by from the International Space Station? I know the answer.
Go ahead, Don.
Go ahead, Don. Pojo, Matthew. I knew I was going to make that slip. We're not supposed to use call signs in our PAO events. So, Matthew, we were lucky enough to be on orbit during a comet. It was 2024, I think Alpha 3 was the comet. And now there's another comet. So there's been 2 comets that we've been able to see and photograph, and I love the way Matthew, how you figured out from geometry where to point the lens in order to get first view of the early comet.
Don, I am so jealous that you're able to say, well, that was the first comet in the mission, and now I'm on the second comet. Like, how do you go to space and get 2 comets, Don? You're super lucky up there. What a deal. That's ridiculous. But Don and I had a blast shooting Comet. We were shooting it both for an artistic perspective, but then also pushing the imagery down to Earth for scientists to go through and look at it, because we had a very unique position on the space station to be able to take this imagery as it came up over the horizon. One of my favorite parts about it is you could see the atmosphere refracting the light kind of like a lens, and so as the comet comes up, you can see the tail of the comet. But super jealous, Don, that you got to go and get a second comet. So lucky.
So we have a question from Kay Breeze, 3rd grade class. This one's a little more general space. So when you get back from space, how do you feel? Don, I know you have this experience, and Matt, now you have this experience, so I'd love to hear from both of you.
Okay, I don't feel very good when I get welcomed back to Mother Earth. It takes about 12 hours, maybe a day before I stop having stomach awareness. That's a polite way of saying that you're puking your guts out. And after the stomach awareness, I'm a little wobbly for another couple of days, and then after that, if you saw me walking down the street, you probably wouldn't know that I'd been off the planet, although there's still plenty of other things going on inside that can take weeks, if not months, to get back to normal. Matthew, what was your experience?
Oh man, coming back to Earth was rough. I really wanted to be back up there with you guys. Obviously, I wanted to be with my family and friends, but Don, you were my mentor for so long, and you never told me that how bad it would be to just sit down. Like your backside is so used to sitting on Earth. Lee and I are doing that right now. But I didn't sit for 8 months, and I guess your body just gets accustomed to not sitting, and I couldn't sit in a chair for more than a couple minutes without feeling sore. And then a lot of the research we do, they ask us to get on a bike and pedal for research, and the bike seats are the most excruciatingly painful things to sit on, at least for me. My stomach also did not agree with me. We're scrolling through the chat here, and I just saw a chat about 3D printing stuff for our cameras. We have 3D printed kind of bumpers for our lenses so they don't scratch the windows. But we also 3D printed some stuff before flight to launch. We 3D printed an adapter, not necessarily for the camera, but for a demo. We wanted to connect 2 water bottles together, and so we were doing some demos with propellant transfer. So we 3D printed some parts for that. And there's 3D printers on space station, both on the USOS side and our Russian cosmonaut side.
Reward on the Twitch stream, and it's waiting for redemption. So, so let us know. We will see if it gets redeemed, and we might have Dawn do something special. But in the meantime, let's see what other questions we're getting in for Dawn. For Scripty Shake asks, thoughts on computational physics, and is this skill useful for experiments in space?
That's yours, Dawn. You're the physicist.
That's yours, John. You're the physicist.
Oh, hold on. What? Say again that question.
They're asking about the value of computational physics in space. It's a detailed question. I think the answer should be something along the lines of, we are so thankful that lots of scientists at NASA do that for us before we get up there. Dawn and I's experience on space station is mainly operational in nature, right? We're operating their experiments. We're helping the researchers do that. We have a cold atom lab up there, I think on the port side of the lab, doing some experiments. But we're enabling the experiments by like setting them up. But the actual physics and computation is done by folks on the Earth.
And I have one more thing. Let's see, we're about to run out of time with Dawn. We might have time for one more question, but we did get that channel point redemption from Ash. So Dawn, if you have a special microgravity demonstration to show us in space, we would love to see it.
I came prepared with a microgravity demonstration. And what I want to show you, watch closely. So right now I've got my hat on like this, bill forward. That means I'm Don Pettit. Now I'm Matthew Dominic, and we have this kind of conversation. Matthew would say, Don, what's the native ISO that you want to run on your camera? Well, I think we should keep it around 6400. But one of the native ISOs is more like 500. Well, we have to figure out whether we could get the image tree we want at 500 versus 6400. So that's my microgravity, a demonstration of what happens when you get two uber geeks in space at the same time talking about imagery.
I regret so much not bringing my hat into the studio in here. Don and I loved wearing hats on orbit, and Don was always giving me trouble on orbit because I was flying around with my hat backwards, and Don had his hat on forwards, and we were always nerding out, and the people around us were just rolling their eyes like, what are these two dudes doing? But Don, I appreciate the impression from the cupola.
I don't know if we can recover after that. So, thank you so much, Don, for speaking with us today. That was really amazing, really incredible, and we really appreciate all of the insight into photography, into research, and your impression of you and Matt's conversation. So, thank you again, Don. We can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Hey, a quick question. Do I have time for a real physics demonstration?
Do it.
Hey, I have a yo-yo here. Look at this. It's a yo-yo that a friend of mine made, and I'm gonna.
Oh, so on the space station we have antennas that point up. It's kind of weird. The first time I saw a model of the space station, there's antennas that pointed up, and I was like, we're pointing up? Yeah. So the way the space station communicates with folks on Earth is it has antennas that point up that go to something called a TDRS satellite, and then beam back down to Earth. And so right now we just lost that. We're switching between one satellite to another. As the space station goes around Earth, it points at different TDRS satellites. So we just lost. We missed the yo-yo demonstration. Yo-yos are a lot of fun on orbit, but I appreciate the. What would you call it? The impression. The impression of me,
yeah.
which is hilarious. Thank you, John.
Can you do an impression of Dawn?
Can I do it? Dawn is a very difficult person to do an impression of. I'll have to think about that one over the next 20 minutes or so. But I used to do impressions of Butch. Butch is a very easy astronaut to do impressions of. In fact, many times Houston would call space station, and Butch would be off camera, so I would also be off camera, but I would answer as Butch. and Houston didn't know that it was me calling back. So I would do my Bush impression to imitate Bush all the time.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
it's
I
fun.
might have to hear that later, too. So for everyone, we are going to try and get that video of Dawn doing that actual demonstration with the yo-yo. Hopefully we'll post that on social media later. Obviously, you can find us at NASA. You can find Dawn on Astro_Pettit, I believe. But also, of course, NASA astronauts. We're all over the place. So you'll be able to find us if you're looking for us. But we are sticking around for a little while to answer some more of your questions, just to talk about everything space station, Matt's mission. We'll talk some more about science and astrophotography. So where do you want to start? I'm going to let you
Oh, it's
take
all
the
over the
lead for a
board.
second.
I'm trying. Twitch is flying here, seeing all kinds of questions pop up. I can talk a little bit about what it was like to fly with Dawn in space, or others. We had a total blast up there all the time. We're working on the space station. You have a full workday of experiments. You have time to work out about 2.5 hours or so, but then you have free time. And so, on Earth, that your free time on Earth from a work day or doing all those kinds of things gets consumed with stuff like a commute,
Yeah.
right? Sleeping, right? Going to the grocery store, like doing your administrative things. What's nice about the space station is you don't have to go to the grocery store. The food's already prepackaged. Food prep is simple, right? So you save all of this time on space station that you would burn on Earth, right? So you get time to do, stuff in your free time. And so Dawn and I would, he was making fun of one of our typical conversations where he and I in our free time would be nerding out about camera settings or quickly like doing some internet searches to try and figure out why the camera's behaving in a certain way, or asking experts on Earth how the camera works and how to take better shots. And so, but Dawn and I kind of sleep shifted a little bit, such that I would stay up late and be taking images, like specifically when the comet was up. I would be taking pictures of the comet late at night because we would see it every 90 minutes. We're going around the Earth so fast, you get a chance to take a picture of the comet every 90 minutes instead of waiting, once a night. We get it a lot. And then Dawn would be getting up early in the morning. And so we had like a narrow window where he and I were both awake at the same time to nerd out together. But then that way we were maximizing window time.
Well, speaking of your photography, Terminals has a question asking, how do you decide which moments or phenomena to capture, and what role do you think visual storytelling plays in bridging the gap between space exploration and public inspiration? That's a good question.
That's a really good question. Okay, so there's a lot packed in here. So where do you decide to take pictures? So one, we are formally trained in technical engineering imagery to support research on the ground. Scientists launch an experiment. We need to be able to take a good picture of that to support that data. So hey, we want to take a picture of plant growth. So a technical image might be having a ruler or a measurement device specifically next to the plant, and it's positioned perfectly so that you're 90 degrees off, orthogonal, so they can get accurate plant measurements, right? So that is almost pure engineering, no art. Or pure science, not art. But then in your free time, I feel pretty lucky. I kind of feel like Willy Wonka, right? The movie, like I got this golden ticket in my chocolate bar, and I got to go to space, right? And so I kind of feel an obligation to tell everybody, wow, it's really amazing there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're inside the chocolate factory, you would go tell all your friends, right? So I feel like an obligation to take lots of images and share what space is like with everyone. So that's like what drives what pictures I take, like what captures life. So we took imagery inside the space station to show what it's like to live there. We do demos on space station to kind of show kind of what it's like to live and play, right? What it's like to translate or move around the space station. We kind of did like a parody video of the Olympics where we floated around and had a good time doing that. That's worth looking up on the internet. But that was just us, playing games in 0G to kind of show what the lighthearted side of space station is like. And then there's some more parts of this question here.
Let's see.
So
right here.
Picking the windows, I'm looking at where the space station is, where the lighting is, what are the, do we have a comet? Do we have a sunrise? Do we have the moon? Like what's available? Which way does the window point, right? And actually they're just showing right now on the live stream, I think. I don't know if they're showing that live, but there's a picture looking out the service module. This is aft in the Russian segment looking out with their airlock, what they use for spacewalks. And this is, I think a moderately long exposure shot, but to capture the aurora, the blue reflecting off the Russian solar arrays, and then it's a long enough exposure and a high enough ISO that we can capture the galaxies, right, in the Milky Way. So, not the galaxies, just the straight Milky Way. So that choice is done artistically. And I think that covers it, like the public inspiration part.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you for asking that. We're still monitoring the chat, so pop your questions in. We're going to get as many as we can. But I wanted to bring up something that you touched on really quickly, which was plants and taking photos of plants. So we do plant research on the International Space Station, which is fascinating when you think about it, because number one, I'm not good at growing plants on the Earth. I'm just going to come out and say it and put it on the record. I'm not. But when you go to space, you have to think through a lot more things that you don't have to here when you're thinking about sun exposure, and you're thinking, how do you even water this? You can't just pour water on it. Water just floats right off. And so I would love to hear about your space farming experiences and how you think that helps, translate to growing plants on Earth.
So I think in some aspects, it's research plants, and so it's easier, it's very controlled. I'll make fun of myself a little bit. My daughter came home with a cabbage. She's supposed to grow a cabbage, right? And I can't remember what grade they give out cabbages.
Oh, cute.
Right, and so, it was early winter time. It was like, I don't know, it was like a January, February time when they give these kids these cabbages. And so growing cabbages in controlled environments makes life easier, right? So we over-engineered it. We went and got grow lights, and we were putting like 18 hours of sunlight on this thing artificially, and this cabbage grew huge really fast because it had some support. Same thing on space station. We have grow lights. We can change how long the light is there. We can change the food medium, right? By I remember one of the experiments, I was injecting the nutrients into the soil with a syringe, right, to keep it contained. You take advantage of physics, right? So we have surface tension. So you can use surface tension to kind of keep the water contained inside a vessel and not leak out, but still be able to give nutrients to the plant. So in some respects, it's a lot easier because it's controlled. But they might be looking at things like, how does the plant know which way to grow, right?
You mentioned surface tension, and that brought to mind, I saw it making the rounds the other day again. Dawn actually developed a coffee cup that you can drink from in space that uses surface tension. Because in space, you have to drink from a drink bag, essentially. The fluid doesn't stay in a container necessarily, and then when you tip it up, it doesn't really necessarily go down. So I just thought that was so funny, and if you follow Dawn, or if you go search space coffee cup, you will definitely find it. It's fascinating.
It's a really, he had some very clear requirements in designing that cup. Like he and I both love coffee. He and I both drink black coffee. We love, and part of drinking coffee is how the smell gets into your nose.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you're drinking from a drink bag, you're missing that part, right? When you consume food, the smell is almost as important as the taste. And so with coffee, Dawn wanted to have that experience of when you pick up a coffee mug on Earth, you get the aroma. And so in space, it's a drink straw. So he looked at something called the wetting angle, and he looked at the wetting angle between the ceramic or the plastic and the fluid, and designed an optimal shape to guide the coffee to your lips, but also have the ability to put your nose into the cup and smell the coffee.
Was that a science of opportunity experiment, or was that something assigned? It was something that he just really dreamed up, right?
Yeah, so he used some of the stuff that was available on the space station to experiment with a couple shapes. I think it was one of his early expeditions. And then he later, kind of did a proof of concept on orbit, just using stuff available on the space station, if my understanding the story is correct. And then he came back to Earth and then designed the actual three-dimensional cup and made it, and then launched a few of us took them with us. Like I took one up there, and others have taken many of the cups up there, and we use them on orbit. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, science of opportunity, can you break down what that means? I mean, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It's in the name. It's in the name. But did you have any chances to do any science that wasn't necessarily on your timeline that you really wanted to dive into?
Sure. So we get the opportunity to take up like a couple of things with us, right? And I brought some things for my kids, but just stuff that kind of helps with your mental health and just things to do. And like you saw that Dawn brought a yo-yo. Yo-yos are fun in orbit, and some of them are science, but most of them are mainly demos, right? And so I think Dawn coined the term science of opportunity, but it's just using stuff that's available to do quick science experiments. Like one time we were using this really, really cold brick that was in it was like a minus 100, I don't know what it was, minus 150 degrees centigrade or something. It was very, very cold brick on space station that was used to cool something down. But then before we put the brick away, we had this really, really cold brick. And so what do you do with that? So we called it science of opportunity. We had some special time. Like we put water on it to watch how water freezes in 0G. It's different, right? Or how crystals form. You can see the crystals forming in a 0G environment. And so we just kind of do the science of opportunity. We make a video, and then maybe we, at some point, like I still have some videos. In fact, Dawn and I did some science of opportunity when I was up there, just thinking about how you transfer rocket fuel from one spaceship to another.
Oh, yeah.
And so Dawn and I, built a couple setups for that, and then played with it. So actually, we posted that this morning on social media. Just let's go see about this. Let's communicate this, and maybe we enlighten some engineer on Earth who sees, oh wait, that's how fluids behave.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do something this way. And we're not doing like some of it's science, right? But it really is demonstrations to get people thinking and inspire folks to come join aerospace, come join us at NASA.
Right, because that's a problem that we're going to have to be thinking about solving when we go to the moon with
Yeah.
Artemis, when we go to Mars. In
Exactly.
space propellant from ship to ship.
And we do it currently.
Yeah.
So like the Progress launches
Right.
and it docks with space station and it transfers fuel.
Right.
It's not a cryogenic fuel. We've done it small scale, but we're looking for Artemis to go do this with cryogenic fuel, cold liquid fuels, and transfer them to go to the moon.
So we're getting some really good questions in the chat. This one from Dustin. How do you perform the same tests in zero gravity with things like medical tests that you need gravity and function to perform? Also, for the fun of it, what is your favorite sci-fi book? But the medical ones. So you guys do a ton of medical research, like
Yep.
we've been talking about, but you have baseline data that you take here on Earth before and after your mission, things like blood draws. And even weighing yourself in space. So can you give us a breakdown of how that works without gravity?
So sometimes gravity helps.
Yeah.
And sometimes gravity doesn't. And so we just take advantage of what we have and make it work. I think about things differently, having been at 0G. Like something as simple as the latch on your fence. Like if you have a fence, right? It's like a wedge, and the wedge drives up, and then when it gets over, gravity drops it in place, right? So
Right.
on Earth, gravity's awesome. Drops that wedge down, gate's locked. It doesn't work. You can't open the gate. In space, you have to compensate for that by maybe adding a spring, right? Now some latches on Earth have springs just for that purpose, but on space you have to add that force since it's not there. Or other times it's helpful. For example, there's a lot of things that happen to your eyeballs in 0G because the fluids come up in your body because they're not held on by gravity and your eyes swell. And so we do a lot of ultrasounds of our eyeballs, right? Or we ultrasound our body. On Earth, you use ultrasound gel. Right?
Yeah.
Because on Earth, if you were to put, gel on yourself, you need it to stick, have
Right.
more surface tension, sticky. So when you go get an ultrasound, they put gel on. In space, we don't need gel. We don't need it. We just use water. Because there's no
yeah.
gravity, right?
It's not gonna roll
so
right
it just
off.
doesn't roll right off.
Yeah.
It just sticks to you and stays there with surface tension. So you just use water in space for an ultrasound, right? So when I ultrasound my heart, or we do this really weird thing where I fill up my eye socket with water and then I ultrasound my eye with water, it works great. So sometimes it helps. Sometimes it's a pain.
Ultrasounding your eye with water. Wow.
It's kind of fun. You put this big globule of water on there. You've got a remote guider, we call on Earth, somebody telling you, hey, turn the probe this way, put it that way. And then you can see the ultrasound screen. So you close the eye that's being ultrasounded, and with the other good eye, you watch the screen and guide it. And you can see your lens, and you can see the whole inside of your eyeball. It's awesome.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Not to miss the second half of the question. Do you have a favorite sci-fi book?
I don't do fiction.
That's okay.
Life is crazy enough. I don't need extra fiction in my life.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember if I have one. There was one I read several years ago about Jupiter, and I'm not going to remember it right now.
Sorry
But-
to disappoint. I'm just not a sci-fi person.
It's okay. It's okay. Another good question from Mondo Blasto. How has 3D printing changed missions, especially with printers in the station?
So I'm a little bit of in my free time, I'm a 3D printing nerd.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time designing stuff for a 3D printer, and then also we have it on orbit. So this is very interesting to me. So common 3D printing on Earth, there's lots of different types like SLS and whatever, but the one that people are most familiar with is called fused deposition modeling, which is the classic piece of plastic that's being laid down in layers. And so if you were to build, let's say, a bridge like this in 3D printing, right, and this is an air gap, when the printer goes across with the plastic, it would just fall down without some sort of support to hold the plastic up. And so on Earth, you design these like support structures, and hopefully they break away cleanly, but it's kind of a pain to engineer for that and design for that. So in space, gravity doesn't cause the plastic to fall, and so you can print without support, which is super fascinating. And so when we were up there, we were printing cardiac tissue. So we had a printer that was printing cardiac tissue, and you didn't have to deal with the complexities of supports that you wouldn't imagine, like wanting to break away stuff off your newly made heart.
Right.
So we were printing cardiac tissue. It's fascinating.
Wow. So, I feel like one of those things that we can't do here on Earth necessarily, right?
That's the idea, yeah.
It's enabled by microgravity. That's fascinating. let's see. Tech demonstrations, another thing I wanted to touch on. So you're like the I'm losing my mind. I'm not losing my mind. I'm losing my words. So you are essentially the handyman when you're on the International Space Station. And that is not the connection I was trying to make in my mind. But tech demonstrations. We have what is an advanced potable water system.
Yeah.
And break it down for me. Break it down, because I think this one is such a good real life application. I want people to understand how this is being worked on the International Space Station. Yes, it helps us prepare for future missions, but it's also very applicable to life on Earth too.
Water, man, what would we do without water? Water is such this crazy, awesome fluid. I mean, you could just have a whole conference on water, right? Like water expands when it freezes, which is why ice floats, right? That's not a common property of things. This is unique. I think there's some other fluids that do it. It's super heavy. It's dense, right? It takes like something like 4 joules. There's just so many cool parts about water that like bring life to the solar system. But the water on space station, because it's heavy, we don't want to launch it, right? Like every kilogram you launch to orbit, you have to have rocket propellant to lift it. And so that just isn't efficient. And so if you're going to keep people in space for 25 years like we have at the space station, you want to reuse your water. And so to steal Don's phrase, like Don's been saying this for years, is like today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee, right? So we use our restroom facilities on the space station, but we immediately separate out the fluid, and it becomes
दो को 50
मैं दिया 100
all low, they are all low.
One enemy.
Whoa!
तुझको जो मैं हो जाऊं पागल मेरे सीने की धड़कन को सुन मेरी सांसों को तेरी ही धुन दिल बोले बूम बूम
Unlimited love. Bookings open on 14th February.
नहीं, वो फिनिश का तो आया था, एक दिखा था मेरे को। क्यों रे रिकॉल भेजा?
मार दिया ब्रो, रिकॉल पे गया था।
मेरे को रिकॉल दे भाई।
स्मोक कितने हैं?
0।
अब क्या कर पता है, ये नीचे गाड़ी है ना, इसका टर्न ले। अभी मत रुक जा, मैं फुल एचपी ऑन दो। निकलते हैं, कल्टी मारते हैं यहाँ से। लो अब टर्न लो, बढ़िया। आजा इसको टर्न ले। रहने दे, हीलिंग्स वगैरह बहुत कम है अपने पे। नॉक हुए तो खत्म है अपना।
तुम्हारी माँ की टर्न मार के क्या करूँ बता।
हाँ तो निकलने का अभी यहाँ से।
चला उसमें नहीं, रहन लिए।
चलो बढ़िया। आप भी ये जो गाली दे रहे हो ना, तुम्हारी माँ की पूरा मत बोलो। हाँ
पूरा कब बोला?
और अगर मैंने दिखा ये पूरा बोला तो, अगर अभी पूरा बोला होगा तो करेगा। गूगल पे करेगा 10,000, गूगल पे करेगा 10,000 करेगा गूगल पे। हाँ तो मत बोलो अभी। डीके में से गिफ्ट का, अरे वो चले गए ब्रो, जो थे ना रैंडमली मैंने दे दिया है। पूरा बोला, पता है, मत बोला मयूर गेमिंग। प्यार से समझा रहा हूँ मैं, प्यार, अरे प्यार से बोल रहा, समझ नहीं आ रहा। अबे म्यूट म्यूट करके दूंगा ना लंबी लंबी। लेडीज माँ क्या कोई मारा नहीं रे? लेफ्ट में बग गया।
इसका ब्रिज कैम बिठा देना लोल्स।
अरे इसका अपना पीछे से एक ब्रिज कैम बनेगा उसका या अरे पीछे बग गई थी बोल रहा हूँ तो कैसा ढीठ है रे।
तू पीछे से बैकअप देना, मैं यहाँ पे आके देख रहा हूँ।
फ्री की लेके मारना है। अबे निकल 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 निकल।
इंडिया की सबसे लेटेस्ट खबर, सनड्रॉप है टेस्टीएस्ट पीनट बटर, हनी मिला के हुआ ये वंडर, इसका टेस्ट है सबसे बेटर, बनेंगे स्ट्रॉन्ग ही एंड हर, ऐसा होगा इसका असर।
अब सनड्रॉप पीनट बटर में है हनी, यानी स्ट्रॉन्ग बनने का और भी टेस्टी तरीका।
The magic of your dream wedding begins with a selection of enchanting venues. Every moment, from the vibrant haldi ceremony to the intricate mehendi rituals, is designed to leave lasting impressions. Let us be part of your journey and help transform weddings into timeless masterpieces of love with the attention and respect it deserves.
ई स्पोर्ट्स प्लेयर बोलते इसकी माँ का। निकल जा मोर, चिकन निकाल के दिखा। भाग जा, भागना, मरेगा, भागना। उसने अपना बंदा छोड़ा है, आप पे छोड़ देगा वो। ऊपर रोको बंदा,
बोल रहा ऊपर छोड़ के आया है। साउंड आ रही है तुमको? म्यूट हो।
धीरे से बोलना, मेरे को तो सुना ही नहीं दिया तेरा। ऐसे चिल्ला रहा है।
चिल्ला गया, मैं पहले ही कॉल दिया कि भाई मयूर गेम नहीं निकल जा। भाई मैं तो स्पोर्ट्स प्लेयर हूँ, है तो ऐसा खिड़की से मारूंगा, वो जो शील्ड वाली गाड़ी है उसके खिड़की से मारूंगा मैं।
नहीं उसको मैं उतार के।
अरे क्या उतार के दिया ना तुमको लंबा वाला अंदर तक, मुंह से निकला कि नहीं आपके? दिया ना किसी ने तो दिया ना। तो निकल जाना। तो ये सब चीजें लेने की नहीं होती है, देने की होती है।
नहीं अकेले खेलने में मजा नहीं आता ना ब्रो।
अगर तुम ना मर दो तो फिर ठीक है, जो करना ही करो, अगली बार से भाग जाया करो। लेडीज नहीं, मैं पहले प्यार से बोला मयूर भाई भाग जाओ।
नहीं वो सुनाई दिया, लेकिन बाजू में
हाँ तो भागना भी, भागना भागना।
तुम सुन नहीं रहे थे तो कुछ चिल्ला दिया। हाँ तो ऊपर बंदा छोड़ के आया है, कॉल अपन दोनों ही दे रहे थे।
दिखा तो क्लियरली दिखा। एक तो लेडीज के माइक ऑफ किसका था?
मेरे भाई का।
किसका था? अरे चाटा मारूंगा, जाना माइक ऑफ था।
नहीं मैं नहीं बोल रहा था कुछ।
रहने दे। अब बोल, लाइक करो, सब्सक्राइब करो, बोल चल।
लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब कर दो गाइस, लेट्स गो।
डाउन चैट, लाइक एंड सब्सक्राइब करना, ठीक है? 20 करता रहेगा लाइफ टाइम। 5 सब्सक्राइबर चाहिए, 10 सब्सक्राइबर चाहिए, 3 सब्सक्राइबर चाहिए, 6 सब्सक्राइबर चाहिए। अरे इतना गेम प्ले तो कर कि लोग सामने से सब्सक्राइब करे। 3 किल मेरे 4 थे।
नाइस, मेरे भी 4 दिल ले।
तो मेरे 5 थे।
हां तो मेरे 6 थे भाई।
मेरे 7 थे। 2 सब्सक्राइबर कर दो, 5 सब्सक्राइबर कर दो। सबसे पहला स्मोक किसने किया?
बैकअप किसने दिया?
सबसे पहला स्मोक किसने किया कि तुम रह हो पाए? सबसे पहले। अरे तो तुम जिंदा ही नहीं रहते तो तुम होते।
तो भाई तू
पहले थैंक यू बोल, पहले थैंक यू बोल, फिर मैं थैंक यू बोलूंगा तुमको। हाँ तो थैंक यू बैकअप के लिए, थैंक यू बैकअप के लिए। हो गया इज्जा बराबर। हगा किसने?
तो तू नहीं था।
अरे क्या इज्जा आगा मैंने, वो तो सीट चेंज किया।
आने देना मैंने कहा ठीक है।
किसको?
वो बंदे।
अरे कैसा ढीठ है रे, हट रे। अभी तो मैं अल्टीमेट में कभी नहीं बोला मेरे को मारने दो, मारो तुम भी।
ओवर पावर्ड भाई, क्या बात।
भले और एक बात तुम बोलो कि गलती है तुम्हारी, वो जो बंदा अंदर आके मार के गया मेरे को,
वो गलती मेरी।
अरे नहीं पहले बोल, पहले बोल। मैंने 2 बार बोला ना, एक्सेप्ट किया ना। अब तो
बंदा इतनी
अब वो
गलती
नहीं
मेरी
अबे
नहीं
नहीं
थी। तू अगर चाहता है
हाँ
मेरे मुंह से
हाँ
सुनना चाहता है तो
हाँ
मुझे सुना दे दो।
हाँ
गलती मेरी थी लेकिन
अब बस 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 हो गया बस सुन लिया मैंने हो गया हिसाब बराबर
इतना तेज है मयूर भाई को रिफ्लेक्स देने का टाइम ही नहीं है घुस गया वो
आना सीधा ऐसा
चलो अभी ये गेम पे फोकस करो
अपनी बिल्डिंग में चले अपनी बिल्डिंग में
आगे आगे चलो यहाँ तो पीटी बन जाएगी दिखेगी भी नहीं किसकी पीटी कौन सी है
ओ अपनी बिल्डिंग में
रोडाइस क्या नाम है ये रशर
तूने क्या बोला
हॉर्स राइड बोलने वाला राइड हॉर्स हो गया
अरे भाई बोलो
होल्ड इट मैं चाकू निकाला पता है लेकिन जैसे ही चाकू निकाला दे दिया
आजा 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 आजा
चलो एक बेस में जाए ना
अरे दो फर्स्ट हिट निकल गई इनके पास
जल्दी आ रहे हो यहाँ पे बंदे मर रहे हैं यार किल चाहिए अपने को
गन छोड़ दे गन छोड़ दे गन छोड़ दे गन छोड़ दे
लो
बंदे आ रहे हैं कूद के आएगा
यार नहीं जाए तू बंदो
आएगा कूद के
बाबू
इसको ना के रख
उठा के लेके आ नीचे इधर लेके आ साले
मैं ना वाकड़े जगह पे खड़ा हूँ यहाँ पे एक गोली बन सकता हूँ
राइट वाले में साउंड आता है अभी शायद इसमें कोई है
हाँ मेरी जान आजा
एक और आया
आजा
मेन पे
टेरेस आओ
भागा भागा मैं आया ना 1 मिनट दिशा को देख के कोई नहीं है
ठीक है